To the right-hand side. To the right-hand side of the chart, the blue portion, that's what was allocated for the military. This is from budget year 2022. And the military starts off with about $765 billion. But that's not the whole picture, because we have other items that should be included in the DoD budget, but are omitted from that line item. We have nuclear arms, which are actually included in energy and environment. We have veterans benefits. We have homeland security, border enforcement, and of course the massive annual interest payment on the military's portion of the national debt. If we add all of these up, that's over $1 trillion. And I'm sure that you all might have possibly some better suggestions on how we could spend some of that money. That is so much money, in fact, that if we looked at the US budget in 2022 and 2023, we're looking at around $875 billion. That's more than the next 9 or 10 countries combined. And the sad fact is that when that NDAA, that National Defense Authorization Act, comes due, the president puts forth an amount that he wants for the military after the military gives him the budget. And typically, the president adds a little bit to what the military requests, and then it goes to the House and the Senate. And members of both parties routinely inflate their numbers that they provide to the Pentagon, so that the Pentagon is getting much more money than they put forth in the budget. So part of that problem is we have a situation where military contractors profit enormously from the military budget. And as a side note, in San Diego, we have members of the Marines and Navy who have families who are going on food stamps because they're not being paid enough. But the contractors are making tons of money. Then the military gains power with more money and buys more lobbyists who influence the representatives, who look at the military economy as something that's too important to cut out. It's almost sacrosanct. In fact, sometimes we talk about, when we address this topic, it's the elephant in the room. And the military spending is increased once again. And part of the issue with that is that many high-ranking military officers retire from active duty and then become board members of these very same military contractors that supply the military. As a prime example, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin was recently a board member at Raytheon, and his 2020 compensation just from being the board member was $2.7 million. The military budget is also looked at as being a jobs program, and a great example is the F-35 fighter jet that is being adopted by all the services and many international allies that we have. But that jet plane has parts that come from 48 of the 50 states. Certainly not the most efficient and cost-effective way to do any manufacturing process, but when you put your military jobs inside a congressional district, it makes it more difficult for that congressional representative to cut the budget. Between 2013 and 2018, the U.S. spent significantly more on border protection than on climate financing. And this is a major issue because we know the effects of climate change will strike primarily first on the global south, creating enormous numbers, anywhere from 200 million to a billion climate refugees within 10 years or so. And we know that the military is dead serious about climate change because they have been quietly preparing to take charge of a planet shaken by chaos, as investigative journalist Christian Parenti refers to plans like these of erecting border walls and then arming the inside of the U.S. with guns facing outside of the U.S. as the armed lifeboat. But many groups are putting forth well thought out proposals with specific targets to reduce military spending in a targeted way without affecting national security. And I point to the Poor People's Moral Budget, War Industry Resistors Network, and even most recently, Congresswoman Barbara Lee and Senator Bernie Sanders proposed reducing the Pentagon's budget by $100 billion. But of course, we know that those amendments have not been adopted, but at least we've got some people starting to talk about them. And I'm reminded of the Martin Luther King quote that's on the screen there: "A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death." And even in Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, the Pentagon's budget is 21 times the annual investment for climate solutions. So even though he's taken a good first step, that investment is still dwarfed by what this country routinely spends on the military. And people have done investigation. This is something else that's come out of Brown University and looks at an investment in job creation is an investment in the defense industry. How valuable is that to our economy versus if we were to invest that money somewhere else, such as clean energy, education, lower education, elementary and secondary, as well as college education, infrastructure, and healthcare. And routinely, it looks like the investment is significantly more to us as a society when we invest in human nourishing issues. So that's kind of the global picture. And what we've learned from giving this presentation is that each area seems to have a particular focus of its own, whether it be nuclear power or Raytheon or Lockheed Martin or some other type of contractor. Well, here in San Diego, we at Veterans for Peace have been protesting the Miramar Air Show probably for about 7 years. And we originally focused on the glorification of violence. We actually produced a video called Disneyland of War. And I'll drop the link in the chat when we conclude this talk. But we sent 2 of our members onto the tarmac at Miramar, and we filmed kids as young as 8 and 10 aiming M60 machine guns at each other with the assistance of the local Marines on the Marine Corps Air Base. So we focused on the glorification of war and violence without presenting the other side of what happens if you do get hurt when you're in some type of conflict. I guess, we haven't had a war We haven't declared war for 80 years. But anyway, we didn't get much community support when we did that. But we switched 2 years ago to focusing only on the pollution that's produced by the Blue Angels. And interestingly enough, I did some investigation, and we know that the military is the world's single largest institutional emitter of greenhouse gases. Well, it just so happens that San Diego has the highest number of active duty troops in the country. And I looked at an economic study that was done by the University of California, San Diego, Rady School of Management, and they boast that the military and defense industries contribute 25% to our regional economy. 25%. Well, I then looked at the climate action plans of San Diego and neighboring communities, and none of them mention the military at all. So to me, we're being asked to reduce our carbon footprint, yet this major institution that has a history of being a very prodigious polluter is going relatively uncontrolled with a very non-transparent status of their emissions. So this is something that we have focused on and have begun protesting for the last 2 years. Air show fuels climate crisis. So we now have 25 local organizations. So to me, this is marrying the peace movement with the climate movement. And the climate movement is much younger than I am, and I think much younger than most of us on this call here, because they understand that it is an existential threat. So San Diego 350, the climate mobilization, we got the Sunrise Movement, some other ones, political organizations. We've also got some churches. First UU Church of San Diego is involved in this. And interestingly enough, I approached the Marines at the Miramar Air Base, and I said, why don't you send one of your public relations officers to address our chapter meeting and tell us, why are you doing this? Why are you putting on this show for entertainment during the climate emergency that we're experiencing? You know, the military acknowledges that it's one of the major threats that they have. Well, they sent me a letter back and they said they would not meet with us because they didn't feel it would be productive to talk about this at a local level. They felt it was a national issue. And I said, I swore, well, I said some bad words, but anyway, I said, it is a local issue to us. It's our skies. So I then I gave this talk to the League of Women Voters in San Diego, and they got excited about supporting us. And they said, well, we want to hear the other side of the story. So I said, here, call the airbase, see what they say. So the airbase actually set up a time to send somebody over. But 3 days before the scheduled talk, they canceled. So there's really no accountability, and they know that we're generating local support here to cancel them. We're all in this together. I mean, they could do some kind of air show with static displays. They could tell us all the good things they're doing for climate adaptation or climate mitigation. I mean, we can no longer do business as usual. But you guys up there, you have Seafair as well. And I've been working with several of you, and you've had a pretty good start. And we see that groups are getting together VfP in Seattle and Tacoma, Seattle 350, Extinction Rebellion. Here they are at, I think, one of the entrances to the Seafair show. And to me, they're pretty gutsy to do this. I mean, that's exactly how we need to get the word out. We're not saying, shut down the military. We're saying, hey, we're all in this together. Come on. To me, this would be one of the best opportunities to get middle class people involved in this struggle. If the military were to say, you know what, the climate crisis is so real that we're canceling this entertainment show that we put on because it pollutes so much. So anyway, what are we doing at the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project? Well, we've got a robust website, and I'll put that link in the chat afterwards. Last year, we got together with Congresswoman Barbara Lee and her staff, and she put forth a House resolution to accurately and transparently report and reduce military emissions so that they can comply and help us keep the increase in temperature lower than the UN agreed upon number of 1.5 degrees centigrade. We've done, like I say, this slideshow about 145 times. We collaborate with climate groups. We meet with congressional representatives. We do media outreach. And we do direct actions. Now, what can you do? I mean, you took a great step by inviting Jim and me up here. Educate yourself and others. Network with your local climate people. Let them know this part of the story. Most climate organizations are doing great work at the local level, but for a lot of different reasons, they don't pay much attention to the military. And I think some of them are, well, some are afraid, some are underinformed, but we have education and truth here. And one of the things we ask of you is, do you know an opportunity where, well, we have 6 people who are trained to do this, but find an opportunity for us to present this. You give us the introduction, and, if you've got a church or a political organization, environmental Democrats or independents, or a UU church or a climate group, we'll be happy to take the time and have this very same conversation. And of course, air show events, I know they're planning for next year already at Seafair, and they're excited about what they can do. So I'm asking you, check out our website. We have a lot of information there, a lot of resources to provide documentation to what Jim and I have been talking about. We have reproducible flyers, informational brochures, bumper stickers are available. And, we've all got to work together on this. We're all in this together, and we can no longer do business as usual. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you so much. I'm going to talk a little now about the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Let me share screen again. First, I want to give you an overview of nuclear armaments worldwide. So, so this is a 2021 inventory of global nuclear warheads. So there are more than 13,000 warheads worldwide, and more than 90% of them belong to 2 countries, the United States and Russia. I'm in Albuquerque, as mentioned, and up to 2,500 nuclear warheads are at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque. Now, a few words about countries that no longer have nuclear programs: Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan. They inherited nuclear weapons following the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991, but returned them to Russia and joined the Non-Proliferation Treaty as non-nuclear weapons states. And the other nations listed below, South Africa, Iraq, Libya, Argentina, etc., they discontinued their nuclear weapons programs. Now, this is a local action here in Albuquerque. On the right, Bill T. Wald, my friend, and on the left, Charles. And they were out on the streets this past January with other members of the chapter to bring attention to the Treaty on the Prohibition for Nuclear Weapons on its second anniversary. Now, this treaty is the first legally binding international agreement to comprehensively prohibit nuclear weapons. The ultimate goal is their elimination across the world. It prohibits the development, testing, production, storage, and transfer of nuclear weapons. It differs somewhat from previous efforts. For example, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which went into effect in 1970, prohibited nuclear weapons in certain geographical regions. 191 countries have signed on to this agreement, including the US. But it has prevented the spread of nuclear weapons to non-nuclear states, but it has not led to disarmament of nuclear states like the United States. This is what the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons wants to change. Now, as of March in 2023, 68 countries have ratified this treaty. 27 have signed but have not yet ratified. However, no nuclear state has supported the treaty, and NATO countries have been an obstacle. Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, and Turkey rejected the provisions of the treaty because it would prohibit the stationing of nuclear weapons on their territory. Only the Netherlands, of all NATO countries, participated in treaty negotiations and voted no on its provisions. Zante Hall of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons noted that there's still a lot of hope. For example, the Convention on Cluster Bombs and the Mine Ban Treaty, these were all achieved without the cooperation of states that possess these weapons. And she points out that most states eventually rid themselves of cluster bombs and mines and signed on to the Mine Ban Treaty and the Convention of Cluster Bombs. Unfortunately, the US, as I'm sure you know, did not. We just sent cluster bombs to Ukraine. Zante Hall argues that nuclear states have blocked multilateral disarmament negotiations while modernizing their nuclear arsenals. And this for certain is true in the United States. According to the Congressional Budget Office, taxpayers will shell out $75 billion a year, each year for the next 10 years to modernize our nuclear arsenal. Gary spoke of the Inflation Reduction Act with its climate provisions, which are a good start, as mentioned. The climate provisions come to about $37 billion a year for 10 years, twice that for nuclear weapons. I want to quote Pope Francis. In a world where millions of children and families live in inhumane conditions, the money that is squandered and the fortunes made through the manufacture, upgrading, maintenance, and sale of ever more destructive weapons are an affront crying out to heaven. The use of atomic energy for purposes of war is immoral, as is the possession of atomic weapons. the policy of nuclear deterrence provides a false security. I want to. Okay, I have a few more. I want to tell you a little bit about New Mexico before I open it up. We're kind of at the heart of everything nuclear, I'm afraid. And I mentioned that Kirkland Air Force Base has an estimate of almost 2,500 nuclear warheads. And this base also hosts the Air Force's Nuclear Weapons Center. The center's responsibilities include the acquisition, modernization, and sustainment of nuclear system programs. Kirtland is also the third largest installation in the Air Force Global Strike Command. We are a nuclear center. We also have Los Alamos Lab. There are now plans to produce at least 30 plutonium pits per year at Los Alamos, and at least 50 more at the Savannah River site in South Carolina. Each plutonium pit is about the size of a bowling ball, and it serves as the trigger of a nuclear warhead. So the plan is to make at least 80 new nuclear weapons every year. In New Mexico, near Carlsbad, we have the waste isolation pilot plant for nuclear waste. And right now, the Department of Energy has a big push to more than double its current size and to expand the type of waste by bringing in powdered surplus plutonium to the waste isolation pilot plant and to eliminate any disposal date. Right now, it's supposed to be a pilot program. They just want to remove that and make it permanent, a nuclear sacrifice zone. And the Department of Energy wants to change the plant's mission from cleanup to enabling a new nuclear arms race. According to the National Academy of Sciences, more than half of the waste isolation pilot plant's increased disposal area would be for waste from plutonium pit production, triggers for new bombs. I'm going to stop it there. I do have some hopeful things to share, but I want to leave at least a half an hour, for questions and thoughts and discussion, and open it up to your voices.
Thanks, Gary and Jim, very much. And you can go ahead and take questions if this is the time. Gary, do you have final comments before we start questions?
No, I'm just excited to spend this time with you and hope that you can find some opportunities for us to continue to give this. That's why we do it. It's grassroots. And, it's truly David versus Goliath. I mean, our budget versus the Pentagon's, we're just a little bit smaller than they are. But these are twin existential threats. And when climate people look at it, they go, I didn't know that. I didn't know that the U.S. military polluted that much. And, it's been a process where the government, even going back to 1997, at the first UN meeting about climate, the U.S. government lobbied heavily to exempt military emissions from being reported. And they were successful in getting that into the agreement, even though the U.S. never ultimately ratified the agreement. And today it's not much better at the UN level because military emissions are only voluntary. So it's, we've got to keep the pressure up on that aspect as well as the budgetary aspect. It's outrageous on where that money is going and how it's like an open faucet.
So I just need to mention a couple things. One is I forgot to turn on the recording until about halfway through, so we didn't get the recording of the first half. So I'm hoping we can supplement with whatever version of the slideshow is on the VfP website. The second one is that the VfP Seattle Chapter 91 was present at the climate rally today at the Seattle Center.
Right.
And they focused largely on the nuclear weapons and on the Blue Angels. There is an active campaign to stop the Blue Angels from performing next year.
That's great. I see the Blue Angels. If we look at the overall pollution, it's a small component, but it's so visible. I mean, they buzz the stadiums. They fly hundreds of miles for a 30-second flyover. But to me, it's something that is so visible, it opens up the subject for discussion. And that's what we want, is we want people to talk about this.
Jonathan, do you have any more of a report back on today's rally?
Sure, there was a lot of connection made between climate problems and social justice, including to events in the Philippines where they had that monstrous typhoon a couple of years ago. We still have a sign from the rallies about that. But yeah, there were probably 200 people there. There was a nice large mural painted in the street, and a very spirited rally, I would say.
Great. Reagan, question?
Yeah, I was following up on Jonathan. So it seems to me when we're trying to get the public to think about the effects and costs of like the Blue Angels, that it would be useful to be able to translate the carbon contribution of a Blue Angels air show in terms that people might be more able to grasp. I mean, for example, how many diesel trucks idling for hours would be the rough equivalent of an air show. Otherwise, it seems to me that it's just kind of, pardon the pun, but airy-fairy and abstract and not really tangible in people's minds.
But we do have that. I mean, it depends on how many times they fly. In San Diego, they fly 40 minutes, three shows a day. No, 40 minutes for 2 shows a day for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And they use about 34,000 gallons of jet fuel. And that's 661,000 pounds of CO2. It's what a car produces traveling 844,000 miles. I mean, it's exorbitant. If you think that would have an impact, I can make a slide with that and put that up there. But it's a large number. But who can relate to that?
Right. I can't speak for others on this call, but I would appreciate
having
that information in my
that's
hands.
good. That's good feedback. That's the kind of stuff we want to hear.
And I'm also wondering if I see that Gary indicated that there is an abbreviated version of the slideshow that we just saw. I've been browsing around on my other computer on the Veterans for Peace website. I haven't found a link to any version. So I was wondering if perhaps you could also post in the chat a link to the abbreviated version. And are you planning to put the full version up also at some point?
We've talked about it from time to time, but each version that we do is a little bit different. We like to look at the geographical area and the interest of people who are involved, and we like to engage with people rather than just send it off, because there are short movies about militarism and climate change as well. But we want this to be an interactive session, and we want to impart that, we want you to send us some other opportunities where we could deliver this. But I think I have a video of Jim doing one in Santa Fe we could send you.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying about the desire for the interactivity. And I think I would find being able to go back through the slides. I was busy trying to take notes, and then I finally just tried to copy and paste screenshots into a Word document.
Well, how about if I send one to Mary, because I have her email and she can distribute
Sure,
it?
that'd be great.
Okay.
Happy to do that. I'd
have-
just like
I
to
have
say
a
there's,
version as well I can send to you, and they're all different. I've done so many different versions of slides, but I can send you one that is recent.
You send her one, I'll send her one as well.
Yeah. Now, should I send it to Mary to send around, or
Yes.
that's fine.
Okay, I'll send it
I'll
to you.
share it with the rest of the group.
Okay.
And I just wanted to draw attention to another thing, as long as we're talking about Blue Angels. One of my neighbors wrote a letter to the editor complaining about one of the huge issues here, and that's the sound and the effect the sound has on animals and small children, and people
And
who are
PTSD as well.
Yeah.
and people with PTSD. So I know you know that, but I just wanted to mention that her letter to the editor actually got into the relatively conservative Seattle Times, and I was very happy to see it there. But the sense that the military has impunity, I think, is really making it hard for us to organize. The way that they just don't put anything in the paper that questions militarism, except for each of us gets about two inches in the letters to the editor per year, or else they say, oh, you've already been there. Occasionally we can get an op-ed in, but I just wondered if you have any ideas about how to break through the media blackout on this issue.
That's a hard one. Last year, the only media coverage we got, and I posted it in the chat, our local PBS station did an interview of me at the start of the air show, and then they also had the public information officer from the airbase. And the first words that the commentator said when he introduced the Marine was, well, the Marines acknowledge that the air show produces a lot of pollution. And then they said, oh, but that's not the point. They want to share with the community all these things they're doing. But no, we have the same type of media bias in San Diego as well. We have to go with the alternative newspapers, the local ones. And another fact about the air show, there were 63 in the US this last year, 63 air shows. And 10% of the pilots historically have died. With the Blue Angels and Thunderbirds, 10% have died in crashes, either on practice or during the actual shows. I mean, if any other commercial venture did that, they probably wouldn't let them continue. I see Louise has a hand up.
Yes, my question is more focused on the nuclear weapons aspect of militarism. And I was wondering, you said, I think you've made something like 145 presentations about these issues. Have you found, or would you share with us, any particular responses that you've gotten that really gave you some hope, things that people think about? I mean, I've been really wondering, given, the emphasis this summer with the Oppenheimer movie and the threats by by Russia about using nuclear weapons, that this issue might become more in people's minds. But I'm not sure that that's happening. So I'm just curious what your experience has been.
Well, most people in the audiences that I've presented to were not very aware of the level of military spending. How can we really address climate change when more than half of our discretionary budget goes to the military, and totally oblivious to how much the level of emissions. And I feel like, the hope is coming from, like I have a quote here I could read to you from Netta. I'll just paraphrase Netta Crawford in her book. She talks about how national security has been defined. As long as it's under the umbrella of national security, it's good. And the effort, how do we redefine this? What about healthcare security? What about job security? What about crop failure? All this money that we spend on the military does not protect us from rising sea levels, from crop failures, from extreme weather. And we see this every day. So I think our task is enormous. We need to redefine national security. Now, I get a lot of my hope from indigenous communities, and I feel like, that I went to a march here Thursday, Stop Fossil Fuel March, and it was led by mostly youth activists, Yucca, Youth United for Climate Change Action, and a lot of indigenous people. And there's wisdom here. And so, I soak that in. And usually when I give these presentations, I quote Winona LaDuke, or I quote, other indigenous people, because I think, to me, I feel like that's where a lot of the hope lies, where indigenous people have been able to remain on their lands and keep their traditional knowledge. That's where we have the greatest biodiversity. And I think that's where there's a way of living in the world that is so different from the military mindset of the mainstream culture, which is what we're up against. I'm from a small Illinois town. Everybody there, if it's military, it's good, and military can do no wrong. And so it's a huge thing to take on. Gary, do you want to add something?
Well, I take hope from dealing with climate people when they hear this information and they take it in and they start to act on it. And we've seen groups like Mass Peace Action actually have an integrated climate change and militarism subcommittee now, where peace groups are integrating this together. Code Pink is doing a lot with militarism and climate change and how they're tied together. So more and more people are talking about it. And it's in the New York City march today. I don't know how it came off, but we had members of our climate crisis and militarism project attending that, and there was a specific anti-militarism component integrated into this march about ending fossil fuels. So I see more and more people talking about it, and that's that's kind of why we're doing this. It is a big hill to climb, but what's the alternative? I'm an optimist. I think we can change things, and it's a matter of getting the word out and getting people convinced to believe in it and to talk about it, and to dispel some of the jingoism that's attached to the military, and the fact that it's sacrosanct. It's not. And we as veterans feel that we have a unique perch from which to talk about this. It's an added level of credibility, although you don't have to be a veteran to join Veterans for Peace. But when we talk about these topics, you know, most of us have seen it in action, and people talk about waste and such, and, you know, we relate that to the budget. But looking at the climate, it's easy to see a jet. I mean, there's outcry today when Taylor Swift uses her private jet. Well, what are the Blue Angels? 6 private jets doing loop-de-loops. Let's get people outraged about that.
Yeah. I want to the nuclear part of what you were talking about, Louise. I want to. I gave a presentation a couple of weeks ago that had a lot to do with President Kennedy's what is now called his peace speech, which he gave at American University 60 years ago, June 10th of 63 to be exact. But this is a quote from his speech. Nuclear powers must avert those confrontations which bring an adversary to a choice of either a humiliating retreat or a nuclear war. And I do feel in the presentations that I've given that because of the Russia-Ukraine war, to the Oppenheimer movie too, to some extent, people are becoming aware that we're on thin ice here, you know, and we've got to change our way. And, you know, the world's problems, you know, climate and militarism, they've got to be resolved at a grassroots level. You know, there's no military solution to climate change. You know, as Gary mentioned, the military has been preparing for climate change caused wars. They're, you know, assuming that governments in climate vulnerable areas, that's mostly the global south, will become unstable, and there'll be mass migrations of people and the potential for conflict for the most basic things: food, water, a place to live. Well, Netta Crawford, in her book, again, she notes that historically, when times have been hard, people have often come together to share resources and to cooperate. And I think this is where the hope is. And it's with grassroots communities and just turning this idea of what is national security. You know, there's so much emphasis on military readiness that we forget our most essential need, a habitable planet. And I should add that people get crazy rich on militarism. And that's what, you know, it's hard to you know, they don't give up their power. You know, it's going to have to be removed. There's a question, Bob and Jean. Bob and Jean?
Unmute. Okay. We're from Olympia, Washington, and we have an Olympia coalition to abolish nuclear weapons. Bernie Meyer is on the call, is also from our organization. And we have been working a lot to publicize the treaty, the prohibition of nuclear weapons, as well as other things. And one thing we have done is to ask the city council for a resolution to say that that we are an anti-nuclear zone, or I don't remember how we put it.
No, that we're joining with the other communities around the world that support the Back from the Brink movement, and also to support the UN treaty and the prohibition of nuclear weapons. There was 4 of us who addressed the city council last week, and you only get 2 minutes. So what we figured was there'd be 4 of us and we'd do 4 2-minute presentations so that we'd have 8 minutes to make our pitch. But anyway, they agreed. So Olympia now will be supporting those resolutions and the treaty.
And my question is, are you aware of how significant this is for cities and states? I believe other cities and states have been signing on to the treaty. And is that valuable in terms of we really can't approach the US government at this point, but is that a viable strategy, do you think?
In my view, it sure is. I mean, I don't see a better approach. You know, this, you know, local, more grassroots level. I mean, it's not going to happen out of DC right now. And, you know, the city, we had a similar thing at the city council here in Albuquerque that you had in Olympia, and it lost, you know, we lacked one vote. It was a 5-4, and we didn't, you know, we haven't given up, but I think these grassroots efforts are what really matters, you know, and I think sometimes we're looking for a great national leader, you know, great climate hero and so on. And I think we had to remember the power that we have together, you know, in our communities and working, you know, with our neighbors, with our, you know, my local Vets for Peace group. It's our main focus. In fact, our entire focus is nuclear issues, and they're even more than what I could describe briefly tonight. It's really amazing. But, you know, there are a lot of people here doing great grassroots work, and we haven't given up on our city council either. We're hoping to elect some better members soon.
I just wanted to make one comment. Jean, I didn't mean to stop you. Go ahead.
The other thing I was thinking of is that we have a pretty strong Thurston climate action team group, and it might be useful for us to try to get them involved in our coalition and to see if we could get your presentation or somehow this information to them. So
That sounds
it's
good.
encouraging. Yeah. Thanks.
We're available. Yeah. Thank you.
And that's exactly how it works is I bet each of you belongs to more than one organization because you are activists. So that's how we spread the word.
Would you come to churches as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've presented in churches. Yeah.
I was at my first UU today.
Yeah.
Talking about on Social Justice Day.
Well, our social justice group last week voted to put nuclear weapons on one of our focuses for the social justice group. So, and this is a mainline Lutheran church, so which is a mixture of military and you know, in the congregation. So I was kind of pleased that we move forward on this.
That's great.
You know, I want to say something. You know, I want to point out that in my presentation, I'm really trying to zero in on militarism, military spending and emissions. And, you know, this old slogan, support the troops. The Pentagon is preparing for climate change caused wars. I'm a veteran of a totally unnecessary war, an insane war. And so this slogan, which to me is always so vapid, support the troops, if it had teeth, we prevent the next unnecessary war, which could be a climate change caused war, which doesn't have to happen. You know, the military they're so worried about military readiness and dominance that support the troops really means nothing to the brass. And, you know, and my heart is with the troops. I want them to stay out of any unnecessary war, such as the one I still dream about, you know. So support the troops, stop the next war.
Right.
I just wanted to mention what we were talking about, what things give us hope. And just to let the two of you know that we had about 2,000 people show up for our yearly lantern floating at Green Lake in Seattle, which is Opposition to War. VfP was one of the sponsors, and we floated over 1,000 lanterns on the lake. And what was important this year was that the Seattle Times gave us no coverage in their calendars of events, and they didn't write up anything about it. But we got great coverage in the International Examiner, which is the newspaper of the Asian American community. It's a Pan-Asian American community paper. And the leadership that we're getting here in the anti-nuclear movement from especially the Japanese American, but really significant Asian groups. There was recently actually a very alarming attack on a museum here called the Wing Luke Museum just a few days ago. Guy attacked the museum claiming that China was, that he was upset with China for some reason. Guy was really nuts. And one of our leaders who also led at Hiroshima to Hope as the MC was the person who happened to be there. And when the police didn't show up, he made sure that he contacted the mayor and said, this is a hate crime. Come on, this isn't just some broken windows. This is serious. And then the Seattle Times put that on the front page. So it's very interesting from my perspective up here, the role of the Asian American community is very important. Our member of Congress, Pramila Jayapal, was born in India. She's had a kind of a rough time. I won't go into all the sadness about that, but she has tried to be very strongly supportive of the TPNW and has had a rocky experience as far as trying to advocate for diplomacy vis-a-vis Ukraine. That she got horrific blowback on that. But I think that is an important community here and a hopeful development. We had over 117 volunteers, many from the Japanese American and Asian community to do the Hiroshima to Hope event this year. Another thing that I found was very hopeful was the fact that, little known fact, I love this one, in the New York Times book review, who ever talks about that? The book that Oppenheimer was based on, American Prometheus, was #1 on that list for 7 weeks. Now it's #4. And that tells me something, that people went to see Oppenheimer and it stirred in them a desire to learn more. And I think that's kind of like the part of the iceberg that we don't see. I shouldn't call it an iceberg, but I mean that people care, whether they're showing up at events or not. People care to that extent. And so I don't think the Oppenheimer movie and its effects are over. I think it's early, really early in the process of seeing what those effects are going to be. Any other questions? That was just a long, long comment. Are there any other folks who have questions for our presenters or comments on anything that makes you hopeful about this rather dismal subject? Go ahead and raise your hand or raise the reactions hand if you like. And I'm not seeing any. Louise, did you have a comment?
Mary Margaret,
did you have a comment?
Yes, I want to say that I have new hope after hearing Jim and Gary talk tonight. It's just such a relief to see you kids at hard work on this. And I know you are right. I know that you are not alone, that there are other people all over the country, all over the world. We do need to keep stirred up. We do need to keep talking. We do need to keep writing and emailing and texting. It's just not going to happen until people advocate, and the house is on fire. As that youngster said, things have escalated, and the budget is ridiculous. When we think of all the things that need to happen in terms of healthcare and education and agriculture and housing, what fools we mortals be. But you are doing a good job. Thank you for sharing it with us tonight.
I'll give you a hopeful. Thank you, Mary Margaret. I'll give you a hopeful quote from Greta Thunberg, the young climate activist. She says, it's a little more recent quote than the one you saw on the screen earlier. "We can no longer let people in power decide what is possible. When enough people come together, then change will come and we can achieve almost anything. So instead of looking for hope, start creating it." And I feel like that's really what we're doing here, And when we go out in our communities, that's what we're carrying with us. Yes, Reagan.
Yeah, I had a question for everybody, really. I have not seen the Oppenheimer film. I have not read the book. I have seen a reference somewhere to the fact that the movie does not depict any of the actual impact on Hiroshima and Nagasaki as a result of the use of those weapons. There's also a lot of pretty damaging information that's trickled out over what was the rush to use them, and the standard response is to reduce US casualties that would result from invading Japan. Japan was on the verge of caving, but the US was also sending a message to Russia. We don't want you entering the war in the Pacific, and so we're going to end it quickly for that reason. And it would be very useful, it would seem to me, to have online access to handy 8.5 by 11 flyers or whatever, with some graphics, some pictures and whatnot, simple, that people could use to leaflet outside theaters where Oppenheimer is showing. Maybe even take them into the theater and distribute them, or whatever. Anyway, that's just how my mind sort of works. I don't have the resources or the time to put something like that together myself, but those of you with the Coalition Against Nuclear Weapons, Veterans for Peace, might be able to cobble something like that together and then publicize it. So, it gives people also a little tangible thing that they can do to try to make a difference. And so.
Yeah, Reagan, I think a similar leaflet to what you're talking about exists, and Code Pink put out a leaflet. Okay. Somewhere in my thousands and thousands of emails, I probably have it, but I think the easiest way would be to go to Code Pink's website.
I will do that.
And they did have a leaflet for people to give out, as they're waiting in line for the Oppenheimer film, they can get some information. And I mean, the film, I thought in some ways was really powerful. You know, this is just my view. It did not cover at all what the displacement of indigenous people or the Hispanos in that area. They were left out of the story altogether. And you're right, it did not show the devastation of the bombs. You know that Nagasaki was not even supposed to be bombed. That was not the initial target. And neither bomb really had to be dropped. The Japanese had essentially lost. And Reagan, I think you're right. It was a message to Russia. I really think you're right on that. But the bomb was supposed to be developed on, supposed to be dropped on an industrial city. I can't remember the name, but there was cloud cover there. And the plane was circling and running out of fuel. And they said, well, Nagasaki is clear. And they dropped it on Nagasaki. So, I mean, this is, I don't want to end on that note. Maybe I should read Greta Thunberg's quote again.
Yeah.
Well, remember my challenge. I want you folks to get us more opportunities up there. Seattle is very, very active. I mean, we saw that in action when the folks came together to protest Seafair. They latched onto that idea and really ran with it, and they're developing more for next year. So let's give them more support as a focal point, and let's keep networking.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Gary and James. I just know that you're networking down there in San Diego and over in Albuquerque, and it's wonderful to see that you're networking, and we're networking up here. And I think the networks are all at a little higher level of concern, a little higher level of activity as each month goes by. So we will meet again, I'm sure. We'll overlap, and we want to encourage everything that you're doing in your regions and the nationals, the great national leadership of Veterans for Peace, our friends Helen and Jerry, and the Golden Rule Project. I mean, so many wonderful things that Veterans for Peace does and that have touched us here in Seattle. So thank you for presenting tonight, and we'll look forward to seeing you.
And Bob and Jean wanted to have something to say closing?
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, just I thought you might have some ideas. There's a fellow in my church who had he was in the Air Force, and he had the launch codes for the ICBMs in Montana. He could have launched them again, apparently. Now, the main concern, because I went to him, I said, "This is my project that I'd like to see starting in our church, a nuclear weapons group." And I says, "How do you feel about that?" He's a friend, and I didn't, I asked him his opinion. He says, "Well, he thought it was okay, but he wanted a wide perspective." He said, as far as he was concerned, what he was doing was defending us against Russia. So he was okay with that. So in a mainline church, because of the population of the people there, you have any thoughts about how a person could present this so that it goes down easy? So it maybe not so easy, but that it seems a reasonable approach or thing to do to a wide range of people who have differing opinions. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Are you talking about the nuclear issue or the climate and militarism?
Yeah, well, I'm talking about the nuclear issue. Yeah.
But the climate issue might make it easier for some people.
Well, we've developed a letter on the climate to send to other groups to engage them. But I'll give an example at my UU church. In the group that I'm in, there's a retired lieutenant commander from the Navy. And we started this discussion about the Blue Angels. And at first he was bristling with resistance. But the more we talked about the specific issues of it, he finally came around and said, I have to agree with you. They should stop the Blue Angels because of the pollution. The climate crisis really overshadows any positive that can come from entertaining people with these military jets. And so in that case, it was just persistence and keeping to the truth and engaging him in a conversation.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, and just one thing to add, for me, when I'm trying to talk about climate or nuclear weapons, say I'm back in my hometown in Illinois, I think, rather than trying to get all my points across, and be right and everything, I think the foundation is to really communicate that you care about these other people, and then the dialogue can begin. It's not that, you can lay out your PowerPoint and, oh yeah, now I see it. I see the facts, it's a little, it takes a little more interpersonal relationships and friendship building.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That would be my thoughts too. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll just throw out real quickly that to follow up on your comment, Jim, that I taught high school social studies for 30 years, and I used a tool that I called Narratives for Courageous Conversations that included a wide range of conflicting viewpoints on various social issues. And I would have my students go through and find several that resonated with their experience and viewpoints, as well as several that upset them, angered them, confused them, and to then discuss in small groups and explain to each other why they had the response they did. And out of those conversations can come deeper listening and desire to seek to understand where these other folks are coming from, rather than simply taking refuge in judging them.
Yeah.
And anyway, I don't know, if you want to post your email address or give it to us, I could send you these if you think that they're of any use to you as a prototype tool.
Yeah, yeah. Let me just, I'm going to put my address in the chat. Okay, I think I got it.
They're built around the idea that we all see the world as we do because through our own filters. I don't know if these are backwards, but this is a repurposed toilet paper roll that I carry with me, and it'll be in the material I send you.
Okay.
But it's very useful in getting people to shift from judging someone else to having curiosity. So what is it that has led you to see whatever it is the way you do?
Exactly.
And that's part of relationship building, having conversation, especially with people you disagree with or think you do. Anyway.
Thank you, Reagan. That's helpful.
And as a former librarian, I have a book recommendation. This is from the Harvard Negotiation Project called Difficult Conversations.
Oh,
It's very, very similar kind of outlook and methodology, but they're very systematic about it. The authors' names are Stone, Patton, and Heen.
Okay. Thank you. Difficult Conversations. All right.
Difficult and necessary, I would.
Well, thank you both so much for being with us this evening. And this is my second closing of our meeting, but we usually do end at 8, and I don't want people to feel obligated to stay later, but thank you. This has been very stimulating, very interesting. And as we move into our next programs, we will be meeting both on the next Sunday of October, And then we will also be meeting for our fall retreat in November. So for everybody from FOR and for you two as well, you're always welcome to come to these meetings. We like to find people who are working for peace and justice and frankly survival at this point, and who have a positive attitude, a kind way of presenting, and you both did for sure. So thank you for being here tonight, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Take
Thank
care
you.
now.
Thank you, Mary. My thanks to all of you.
Bye now.
Right.